So Zelensky has no cards. He has only one thing: Donald Trump. Trump said. I just want to ask, what does that even mean?
Well, I think it's the same reaction that most of the world has, whether you're Denmark, whether you're Ukraine, or Venezuela. Many countries aren't quite sure what the strategy that is being employed by President Trump. For some political supporters of President Trump, they explain that this means that this is a chaos agent, and because of his unpredictable actions, President Trump is able to conquer or win in engagements with his political opponents. I don't know if that's going to work out in the long term, specifically in terms of his disagreements with Greenland and the future with Denmark. But as far as what's happening with Ukraine, we know that Ukraine seems fairly confident that they have been working towards several agreements, that they would like to see these agreements signed by the end of January 2026. And the next steps are really about working with those members of the cabinet and the administration of Trump that are all on board with doing this. So whether it's Steve Witkoff, whether it's Marco Rubio, these meetings, whether they're virtual or in person, are going to keep happening. Whether Trump decides one day that Ukraine can win it all back, like he said in September, or I won't give them tomahawks, like he said in October. So to understand what Trump's saying, cards or what have you, that's one issue. But working towards an agreement that can last for a long time, that's an even more important issue.
But how concerned is Trump really about Ukraine? Or should we say about Greenland instead?
Trump seems to have a lot of thoughts that he throws out on a daily basis. He also has more people around him who are throwing him ideas that are not in line with the national security infrastructure. More importantly, there is no interagency process here in the United States where people who are removed situation would hear a proposal from the president or another cabinet member, and they would say, well, these are the reasons that you shouldn't do this, because these are the after effects if you were to do this. And that's not happening. We have consolidation of power with the National Security Advisor and the Secretary of State being the same person. The last time this happened, for historians in the audience, is when Henry Kissinger was the same dual role under Nixon. And this is why the next president, Gerald Ford, decided to split that off and once again have an independent voice separate from the State Department National Security Advisor to have a difference of opinion and say, if we do this, these are the bad things that would happen. I think in terms of the Trump administration, we're hearing less and less diverse voices and more of the same. We're hearing Donald Trump and Marco Rubio and Stephen Miller, the deputy chief of staff, who that role has never spoken publicly as much as this deputy chief of staff on international issues, on domestic issues. We're hearing these small number of voices express their opinion of what should happen, and we're not seeing that there's a large number of other cabinet officials who can interact with them and say, actually, if you do this, for instance, announcing a prosecution of the Federal Reserve Chairman, which happened late last night in the United States. This morning, we woke up with the stock market dramatically lower, which is something another voice in the cabinet would have warned the president about.
Is Trump now questioning NATO itself if an attack on Greenland were to happen? You really couldn't come up with a better gift for Putin than that.
100%. This has always been the goal of the of our enemy to the north, which is breaking up NATO from the United States and breaking up NATO altogether. We have also heard this from the United States, especially in the national security document that came out in December, that they would like to see Europe disunited. They are not in favor of the United States of having a united Europe. They don't see the benefit of it because they would like to deal with each country individually and not have them gang up on them. Even though the United States is once again the largest, the most high-performing economy in the world, it is the most powerful army in the world, and still somehow the United States, this administration feels that the United States is constantly being attacked in some way. There was a political analyst over the weekend who was saying this is an aberration of history. Throughout history, I believe it was Fareed Zakaria that was pointing out, whether you're the Athenians, whether you're the Alexander the Great, Genghis Khan, even Rome, the largest empire always, in the end, had other countries and other forces aligned against it. Nazi Germany, they were conquering countries, but they never were able to get the majority of the world to stand with them. Similarly, the United States should be in a position as the largest economy and the largest military that other countries should be ganging up against them, but they haven't. In fact, the United States for several decades has been the leader of this alliance of democracy in the world. And what Donald Trump is doing is he's turning against these alliances that we've built up, where the United States has raised up the smallest country and allowed them into the international trade arena to raise up their own level of poverty higher than higher incomes for the people, more trade, more economic opportunities. And this is being systematically destroyed by this administration, to the extent that in his comments late Sunday night here in the United States on an airplane, President Trump mocked the people of Greenland and the fact that their security forces are two dog sleds. He mocked our armies of Denmark, which were the first countries on the ground in Iraq in 2003, that sent nearly 20,000 soldiers to Afghanistan between 2002 and 2014. This is the kind of thing that international partners remember for a very long time. Americans might forget, but diplomats will never forget.
Mhm. Many people don't believe in a scenario where NATO disintegrates, but many people are taking it seriously.
Well, I believe the Danish prime minister said in the last 24 hours that moving militarily in any way against Greenland would mean the end of NATO. And surely it would be, because if there were any kind of military action, let's say the unmarked little green men scenario of Crimea, let's say the United States simply landed additional military forces on Greenland without prior approval. What would the response be? Denmark could turn to the NATO Commission of countries, and they would ask for a response from other countries, and the United States, as a member of that commission, would veto it. And that, in a sense, would be the end of NATO, because all the other countries of NATO could not respond to an attack on one because one country vetoed it.
And what about Iran? Why isn't Trump intervening in what look like a revolution in Iran? We hear threats, but we don't see action.
It's still possible. In fact, I believe today, which is Monday morning in the United States, Donald Trump had on his agenda a briefing by the Joint Chiefs to lay out all the different military options for the United States if there were to be a secondary strike following that military strike on nuclear facilities last summer. If there were to be a strike, today would be the day it would be discussed. We don't know when that would happen. However, in the end, it's all about stability in the world. What would happen if we were to remove the regime in Iran? Many political analysts and security experts are pointing out that this is a much larger piece of territory than Iraq, a much larger piece of territory than Libya or Syria, both areas that lost their leadership and then devolved into civil war and ended up having many more deaths after the change of administration than during their oppressive regimes. This is a question that needs to be worked out, because we're already interfering as the United States in a change of administration in Venezuela, even though that's one person, and we did not decapitate the entire government. It is something to consider if it's a popular revolution that throws out the leadership of Iran. Who are the people who are coming after that, and do they have the ability to control the population through the military or police?
If Iran falls, no matter with whose help, what would that seriously weaken Putin in your view?
Absolutely. We've seen this with the change of administration in Syria, this change of administration, albeit very small in Venezuela. It's still, the vast majority of the government there. However, and especially the Minister of Interior and other generals who work very closely with Russia. However, what has been disrupted is the shadow fleet. And this is something that Iran is very much involved with. It was the first country that was named a state sponsor of terror back in the 1980s in the United States. And for many, many years, a lot of its oil trade has been done on the shadow fleet side. Russia began to take over the domination of the shadow fleet beginning in the early 2010s in preparation of the Ukraine war, but also following the attack on Georgia. Russia really coordinates all international sales as far as the shadow fleet, whether it's oil coming from Venezuela, a sanctioned country, oil coming from Iran, a sanctioned country, oil coming from Russia. And the less pieces are involved now, We take Venezuela off the table. We take Iran off the table. Now Russia is really limiting itself to just how many tankers there are, because it's no longer other countries' tankers that are involved in moving this oil around. And that, in the end, is exactly what the armed forces of Ukraine are doing, targeting Russia's ability to fund its military by taking out the oil.
Next question, my favorite. Trump has other problems too. He's not just fighting the smuggling, but institutions as well, like the Federal Reserve. Republican Senator Tom Tillis has promised to oppose any Trump nominees to the Fed. Does this mean Trump is now facing resistance inside his own party?
Well, Senator Tillis, senator from North Carolina, has announced that he will not be running for Senate. So he is essentially saying that he can do what he wants because he doesn't have to worry about being reelected. We will see if there are other senators who are willing to either stand up to President Trump or else support Senator Tillis. The one effective measure that Senator Tillis has is that he sits on the Committee for Banking in the United States Senate, which means that if he does not vote for a nominee proposed by President Trump, then the entire Senate cannot vote on it with a simple majority of 51 votes. They would have to vote, as far as the entire Senate, with a 60-vote majority. So just because of the specific nature of Senate rules, the fact that he can block it in committee means that effectively he's blocking it in the entire Senate, which is a serious problem for President Trump, because if President Trump had just done nothing, if he had not decided to press charges, made up charges from a lot of experts here in the United States, if he had decided to do nothing, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, her term would expire in May, and he could appoint whoever he wants. Instead, President Trump has decided to do this legal operation. He has effectively blocked any future appointment for the new chair because of angering senators like Senator Tillis and other senators he might represent. So this is, again, a very ill-timed, stupid move, many experts will say here in the United States, of doing something instead of just waiting, and in a couple of months' time, everything would go Donald Trump's way anyway.
It looks like Trump wants his own man in the Fed to have the necessary economic situation in place for the WOPs.
Yes, and this is, again, a problem that we had. We'll go back to Richard Nixon. I mentioned the fact that back then we had the national security advisor and the Secretary of State being the same person. That was a problem that the next president had to fix. Similarly, we had a federal chairman who was listening to President Nixon in the United States during his administration and lowering interest rates when he should either have kept them at the same level or been raising them. And that led to what is now being feared in the United States is happening now, which is after the Nixon administration, we entered a period of stagflation, where inflation kept rising, but employment kept dropping. And it was a bad situation economically that could only be helped by raising interest rates here in the United States by an independent chairman that President Jimmy Carter put in the late 1970s. This is the situation that is being set up for whoever is the next president. They will have to clean up the economy if the president puts in a person who lowers interest rates at his behest and not be an independent agency, and then possibly have long-standing economic effect on the United States economy that will only be fixed by a next administration whose only response is to do something economically harsh for the American people. They do not want higher interest rates, but that's the only way to combat rising inflation, which would happen if you lowered interest rates during this economy right now.
But how do Americans feel about even like events like Trump's attack on the Fed?
Unfortunately, the president is very adept at manipulating the American public and the media sphere. This weekend, we did not talk about Iran on the news. Many major broadcasts were not talking about what's happening as far as Chairman Powell. The majority of a conversation is the chaos being brought on the streets of the United States by his immigration control agents, including the shooting of innocent civilians by these agents. These are not overly trained personnel. They are going around masked with unmarked vehicles, arresting people on the street. And then if we are to believe the federal judges who are investigating the conditions, People who are rounded up by these ICE agents are held in conditions that rival those in countries with authoritarian regimes. In one New York City facility, there were 9 people in a 2-meter by 2-meter cell with one toilet in the middle. There were no beds. There were no sheets. They simply had to sleep amongst themselves for a period of 10 days until a lawyer could come and visit them. Similarly, women are being caged into these facilities without proper sanitary napkins and other things. This is why you see the kind of protests happening around the United States in reaction to these immigration roundups. This is why clergy are worried about the kind of people who are coming in from the United States government to search if there are any immigrants within their church. So this kind of thing distracts the American populace from what's happening. Like I mentioned, almost very little coverage on everyday news coverage here in the United States about what's happening in Iran, what's happening with the seizures of tankers off the coast of Venezuela, as well as what you just mentioned, which is the prosecution of the independent Federal Reserve Board, the independent central bank of the United States.
Can you tell more about the ESA ICE agent and how this might all end?
Well, there's a big discussion now where supporters of President Trump are saying that they are shocked that people aren't listening to law enforcement or police, ICE agents, and they should just be listening to what the government is saying, which stands in line against all of American history. America founded on revolution, revolutions against taxes by the British monarch, the Boston Tea Party. We had whiskey rebellions. Then after America declared independence, we had rebellions against slavery, rebellions in favor of votes for people of color as well as for women. Our entire history is dominated by civil disobedience against law enforcement. And here we have, once again, immigration enforcement, that's what they're calling it, happening throughout the country with armed personnel walking around in masks, no identifying information about them. There's not a name of who the officer is. There's not a number. They're driving up in unmarked cars and sometimes coming up to people in vehicles and pulling them out, usually assaulting them. Many people who have either served in the United States military or their children have been beaten up by these ICE agents. And in the end, like I mentioned, the harshest thing is where they're being held. And this is why people are being upset. Here in New York City, in a neighboring church to my Ukrainian church, there's a church that has been protesting for the last month because a member of their congregation was abducted by ICE. This is somebody who was married to a U.S. citizen. He was applying for paperwork to become a U.S. citizen, and he was abducted, and his partner had no idea what was happening to him for a full 2 weeks. As I mentioned, many of these facilities do not allow access to lawyers even to many of those people who are rounded up. It's an unfortunate situation in the United States. It's something that's going to be worked out in the courts. But I think in the end, as all these other movements I mentioned, anti-slavery, vote, the right to vote, anti-oppression, in the end, we all know what happens, which is that the oppressive regime falls apart and something new comes in place of it.